Hey there, I'm working on Inner Urge, the famous Joe Henderson tune. It's very popular among jazz students. And yeah, I'm gonna give you some ideas of how you can approach improvising over this tune. And I'm gonna divide the tune into two sections. It's already in kind of two sections. The first half of the tune, we have 4 chords for 4 bars each. And then in the second half of the tune, the chords are moving more quickly and it presents more of a challenge for the improviser. So we want to avoid this trap of being able to improvise over the first half pretty okay, and then as soon as you arrive at the second half, you're going to end up in trouble. So having said that, let's start with the easy section, or less difficult ones. So we are on an F sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord for 4 bars. And then we have a bunch of Lydian chords. F Lydian, E flat Lydian, D flat Lydian, and yeah, that's it. So we're gonna loop that section and try to work over that. So let me just make a little loop here. First off, I'm just gonna try to play scales. So F sharp Locrian over the F sharp, and then F Lydian, E flat Lydian, D flat Lydian. Here's the thing though, you can think of the first chord as a C Lydian, because F sharp Locrian and C Lydian share the same notes. So if it's easier for you to think of everything in C Lydian, you can do that. So I'm gonna do that, and so I'm just gonna play the scales, running up and down, and get used to where they are on the fretboard and get used to the sound, as it were. So here we go. So I'm kind of just running the scales. I don't think too much about different techniques or anything. I'm just kind of playing the scales. So I think half of the work is if you can get the sound in your ear so that you hear the modes as they move through the different bass motions, then you are halfway there. So of course you need to kind of know where your scales, but I'm kind of assuming that you know your scales. I'm also kind of assuming that you know what a Lydian chord is, like any kind of sharp 11 chord creates a Lydian sound, right? So that's what we're going for here. You could obviously come up with a myriad of different voicings, but I'm just kind of playing the normal sharp 11 voicings. So what you want to avoid, and we're going to talk about this more in the next section, is you don't want to play something here and move it down. You want to be able to kind of go in any direction regardless of how the bass is moving, right? So I think Wayne Shorter said something along the lines of, I don't want the chord changes to dictate what I'm playing. I want my idea to be in charge of where my melody is going, as it were, something like that. Okay, so if I just play the scales, it's gonna sound like this. And I treat the first chord as a Lydian, C Lydian. It's just gonna sound like this. That was a mistake. There it is. Okay, so that's scales, and obviously this tune is about the Lydian sound, right? So it's very different from old American songbook standards. This is something new, or it was, I think this album was released in the 60s. So this was a very new thing, and now it's kind of part of the jazz canon or the jazz repertoire. You need to be able to do this. This is very normal in the jazz world today, so it's actually kind of old now. But if you think of it in the historical context, this was probably very fresh and new when it came, so you need to be able to, it's a very different approach than improvising over, let's say, a standard, right? So this is more of a jazz composition. Now let's move on to other options. You can actually play bop scales. So that would be over the F Lydian chord, for example. You can play a G mixo bop scale. If I start on F, you get the roots, and then get the ninth and the third. Sorry, you get the root, ninth, sharp 11, and 13. So if you don't know bop scales, you can watch any of my previous videos on bop scales. I've made quite a few. So the idea is to get to play a chord tone on strong beats and the passing note on weak beats. But in this case, we have extensions. So we want to get those extensions on the strong beats. So that's why we're superimposing another bop scale on top of this chord, right? So I'll just play the scales so you can hear what it sounds like. So I'm going to start with a D mixo bop scale starting on C. I'm still thinking of the first chord as a C Lydian chord. G mixo, F mixo, and E flat mixo. should probably mention something about this too, though, that this is not a bop tune. So you have the early jazz, and then you have bebop, and then you have this more modern or a little bit of a modal approach. I've talked about bebop in my previous lesson. You don't, even though this is a bop scale, you kind of don't want this kind of sound. The kind of bebop cliches. It doesn't fit over this tune. It's not the style or the appropriate genre. This is not how they play it. I mean, of course, you could do that if you wanted to, but this is about something else. So I'm thinking more of the way kind of Pat Metheny uses bop scales, like more than, you know, the Donna Lee kind of sound. Doesn't work over this tune because it's not what he was going for when he wrote this tune, I don't think. So that's just my opinion. Anyway, moving on to Pentatonics, works amazingly well over this tune. So you could, if you think of every chord as a Lydian chord, you could just go down a half step and play a minor pentatonic, the Lydian trick, as it were. So over the first chord you have a B minor pentatonic, and then over the F you get an E minor pentatonic, E flat D minor pentatonic, so on, and I'll show you what that sounds like. B minor pentatonic, E minor, D minor, C, D, so there are of course some other pentatonics you can use as well. I might have by mistake played a few of those, but again, I have previous lessons on pentatonics, and there's plenty of resources out there covering how you use pentatonic scales over, let's say, Lydian chords. So I'm gonna move on, moving pretty quickly here, as you can tell. Let's slow down and have some coffee. Okay, next is arpeggios. Just like the actual arpeggios, F sharp minor 7 flat 5, F major 7, E flat major 7, and so on. It's gonna sound like this. F major, try to make some melodies. Maybe some classical influence. Okay, that works pretty good. And here's the thing though, this tune, in my opinion, is all about the major 7 flat 5 sound. Major 7 flat 5. Some of you are protesting now and saying it's a sharp 11, but that's kind of splitting hairs. Theoretically, it's a sharp 11, but if you think of the shape, it's easier to think of it as a major 7 flat 5, or the voicing. Just a major 7 and lower the 5th. So you play those arpeggios, they're in the melody, right? That's what this tune is about, in my opinion. This is what I here. So those arpeggios, I've talked about them before as well. They're pretty not very user friendly for us guitarists, I don't think. So I'm gonna try to play C major 7 flat 5 arpeggio over the F sharp, F major flat 5 arpeggio, E flat major 7 flat 5, and so on, and show you what that sounds like. Okay. F flat 5. Also, you can kind of hint to the melody of the tune. I think it's a very good idea. The rhythm and the kind of okay, so those are the major 7 flat 5 arpeggios. Now, moving on, of course there are other things you could do as well. You could do hexatonics and superimposed triads, triad coupling, superimposed scales, superimposed arpeggios. There's tons of stuff you could do. I'm not gonna get into everything, so I'm kind of moving on here. So what I want to look at now is some licks, because it gives you a lot of time, the 4 bars, to kind of come up with interesting shapes. So instead of just playing, let's say you have an F Lydian, right? And if I play the arpeggio, that's just one way of playing those notes, right? There are so many ways you can kind of come up with arpeggios that are not stacking thirds. There are some people that have books like Artful Arpeggios, I think it's by Don Mock or Joe DiOrio. Those kinds of players, they have come up with different systems, Tim Miller, of playing arpeggios in different shapes. So try to think of some of those. So an obvious one would be this one. So I'm playing F and then fifths. This is a very common thing, and then I move it up a second, and a fifth and a fifth. So it's kind of like stacking fifths. You get that Lydian sound, right? You can do it in minor if you move up a half step, like a minor second instead. There's also that tune by Joe Satriani, but he plays more of a sweep thing that I can't do. So I'm gonna experiment with that lick. So this would be the first lick, I guess. So I'm gonna play that over these chords. Doesn't really work that well over the F sharp, but for the F, difficult with this guitar, has no cutaway. I'm just gonna play an F sharp minus 755. Okay, so that was the first lick. Second lick would be to play a sus triad. So F again, I'm playing F to G, and then, so it's a sus 2 triad. I'm out of tune here, sorry, bear with me. It works really well if I start on the third of this chord. So it's a great way to get from a low note to a high note. So I'm playing the same shape, right, on different set of strings. Something Scott Henderson told me when I studied with him 10 million years ago. Oh, by the way, this previous thing also is totally Scott Henderson. So I'm stealing this from him. So I'll try to play this lick over the chords, so here we go. Again, the rhythm of the melody. Right, so it's a very different kind of arpeggio than this, you know. Very modern sounding, and yeah, I like it. Okay, so this video is gonna be pretty long, so I'm gonna divide it into two. So I'll see you in the next video where we cover the second half of the tune, which is going to be a little trickier. So I shall see you then. Bye bye.